The girl was the brightest star of the acrobatic troupe. Her mermaid performance looked astonishingly lifelike, but in the middle of the show, she suddenly died inside the giant water tank at center stage. Even more horrifying, someone had carved the word spring into her back, and it seemed to be connected to a terrifying curse. One day, young detective Hajime accompanied Miyuki to Shanghai, China. Miyuki was there to meet her pen pal, Lily, who was an acrobat. After getting off the plane, they arrived at the acrobatic troupe's headquarters. It was a massive cruise ship that had been converted into a floating theater. The performers lived, ate, and rehearsed aboard the ship, and even the stage was built inside it. There, Miyuki finally met Lily and was introduced to the rest of the troupe. Lily's father, William, was the troupe's leader. Her older brother was Bruce. There was also Shiho, who was said to have once been a gymnast in Japan. After chatting for a while, it was time for rehearsal. The troupe was scheduled to give a public performance the next day. Hajime and Miyuki watched the rehearsal from the audience seats. Sitting nearby was an elderly man named Joe, a retired acrobat. He quietly told Hajime, "The mermaid performance is cursed. If they don't want anything to happen to Lily, they should hurry and convince her to stop performing." Hajime asked Joe what he meant. Joe said the story dated all the way back to ancient times. According to legend, during the Yu Kingdom, there was a man who took advantage of a mermaid who had fallen in love with him to help him achieve fame and success. The mermaid granted him extraordinary wisdom on the condition that he would marry her. But after achieving his ambition, the man betrayed her. He persuaded the mermaid to remove her scales so she could live beside him in human form. After painfully stripping away her scales, the mermaid finally realized that she had been deceived. From that day on, the man's entire bloodline was cursed. Before long, his family was completely wiped out, and that curse has supposedly survived to this very day. Hajime didn't take Joe's warning seriously. Even so, he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. After rehearsal, Hajime met the rest of the troupe during dinner. Sosuke was the troupe's advisor. Damien performed sword swallowing. Renee was one of the mermaid performers. Everyone chatted casually, but the moment Sosuke mentioned the mermaid performance that would close tomorrow's show, everyone's expression suddenly changed. It was as if the mermaid act was something they all feared. No one was willing to say another word. Meanwhile, in another room, William sat clutching his head and groaning in pain. The next day, the performance officially began. One breathtaking acrobatic act followed another. When the stage lights turned blue, the grand finale, the mermaid performance finally began. A massive glass water tank rose to the center of the stage. The four mermaid performers, Renee, Damien, Bruce, and Lily all dove into the tank together. The audience erupted into thunderous applause. After the mermaid performance ended, Lily went to find William. Instead, she discovered his lifeless body. Lily let out a blood-curdling scream. Everyone rushed to the scene. William had been shot through the head and was slumped lifelessly in his chair. But something about the scene was strange. His entire body was soaking wet, and there was a strong fishy smell. There were puddles of water on the desk, and a shattered fishbowl lay on the floor. On the wall beside him, someone had written a single word in blood, spring. Joe explained that the first line of the mermaid song was, "Spring has come, and the mermaid glides across the water. This is the mermaid's curse." After the murder, Shanghai detective Bob arrived to investigate. William had been killed at around 7 o'clock in the evening, which was exactly when everyone was performing on stage. During the show, the only backstage entrance had remained completely sealed. That meant everyone had an alibi. As Bob continued his investigation, he discovered that Bruce had been away from backstage for about 10 minutes during the performance. Bruce immediately became the prime suspect. Although Hajime had his doubts, he had no authority to interfere. Just then, Inspector Isamu unexpectedly appeared. He had come to Shanghai to investigate a different case. Isamu introduced Hajime to Bob as a famous young detective who could help with the investigation, but Bob made it clear that he didn't need any assistance. Later, Hajime and Isamu walked along the Huangpu River. Isamu explained why he had come to Shanghai. 10 years earlier, a suspect in a Tokyo case had fled to Shanghai. That suspect was none other than the troupe's advisor Sosuke. Although it had happened a decade ago, Isamu had reopened the investigation. The following day, Isamu met with Hajime again. According to the police's ballistic analysis, the weapon used to kill William was most likely a Derringer pistol, because the gun was so small. It could easily be hidden or discarded. The police searched the entire ship with metal detectors, but found nothing. They believed the killer had already disposed of the weapon to prevent the murderer from bringing the gun back onto the ship. The troop installed a metal detector at the entrance. Later, while wandering around the ship, Hajime accidentally entered the tiger enclosure. Damien happened to pass by and jokingly warned him to be careful not to get eaten. He explained that once the tiger had finished eating, it couldn't perform anymore. The tiger was also an extremely picky eater. It refused food from anyone else. Only Lily could feed it. Just then, Bruce walked over and told Damien to hurry up and get ready for the next performance. Then, the second murder occurred. Everyone was watching the mermaid performance on stage when one of the performers suddenly fell from a high platform straight into the giant water tank at center stage. Hajime looked closely and realized the victim was Renee. Carved into her back was the word summer. Summer has come, and the river runs green and purple. It was the second line of the mermaid song. Everything seemed to match what Joe had warned them about. The mermaid performance appeared to be cursed. The police rushed to the scene once again. Bob immediately turned his suspicion back to Bruce, because once again, he was the only person who couldn't account for his whereabouts. Before the show, Sosuke had already noticed that Renee had disappeared. He believed that without Renee, the mermaid performance was no longer worthy of being the grand finale. So, he moved the mermaid act to an earlier slot and replaced the finale with the tiger show. Bruce strongly opposed Sosuke's decision and refused to go on stage. That was why he was believed to have had time to commit the murder. Although Hajime did everything he could to defend Bruce, Bob remained convinced that Bruce was the killer. Left with no other choice, Bruce decided to escape. He asked to use the restroom, unlocked his handcuffs, and jumped out the window. Meanwhile, Hajime was already waiting offshore in a boat to help him escape. Hajime believed there were still too many unanswered questions. The biggest mystery of all was the murder weapon. Ballistic tests had already confirmed that both victims had been killed with the same handgun. After the first murder, the police never found the weapon. On top of that, metal detectors had later been installed at every entrance to the ship. Yet no one had been caught bringing a gun on board, without even finding the murder weapon. Bob had already declared Bruce guilty. Hajime couldn't accept that conclusion. With no other option, he fled together with Bruce. Bruce then told Hajime that Lily was an orphan whom William had taken in 10 years earlier. She had lost all her memories at the time. William adopted her as his daughter, so the two of them weren't related by blood. However, their feelings for each other were very different. Lily treated Bruce like an older brother, but Bruce was in love with Lily. Hajime decided to visit the village where Bruce had grown up. He hoped they might find some clues inside William's house. After arriving at the village, they first entered William's study. The room was spotlessly clean. Bruce remarked that it was the first time he had ever seen his father keep the study so tidy. His desk used to be covered with books. Hajime glanced at an old grandfather clock and noticed that something about it seemed unusual. He casually turned the minute hand. Suddenly, a hidden compartment opened beneath the clock. Inside was a stash of cash. Among the piles of money, Bruce found a diary. It recorded all of William's crimes. On the surface, William had been the leader of the acrobatic troupe, but behind the scenes, he had been running a stolen car smuggling operation. Together with Sosuke and Renee, he stole cars in Japan and smuggled them into China. The diary also revealed that Sosuke had once run someone over with a car in Japan. It was most likely the very case Inspector Isamu had come to investigate. After finishing the diary, Bruce broke down in tears. His father had always seemed like an honorable man. The truth completely shattered him. But William was already dead, and Bruce was still the only suspect the police were pursuing. So, the most urgent matter was that he had to clear his own name. Hajime and Bruce decided to sneak back onto the ship to uncover the truth. But the moment they boarded the vessel, they ran into the police. Bruce suddenly unleashed a strange martial arts technique and knocked the officers to the ground. He told Hajime that it was Drunken Fist, which he had learned from Joe. After that, they headed off to question Sosuke, but written across Sosuke's door was the word autumn. Hajime immediately rushed inside. Just as he feared, Sosuke was dead. He had been shot in the head and dumped into a bathtub. It perfectly matched the third verse of the mermaid song. Autumn has come, and the traveler drinks the foul water. On the floor, there was a cushion with a bullet hole through it. Nearby, the refrigerator door was standing open. The moment Hajime saw the refrigerator, he immediately remembered that dry ice had been used on stage during the time Renee was killed. In an instant, he realized something. Just then, the police arrived. Bruce was arrested once again. Technically, Hajime had committed a crime as well by helping a suspect escape. But out of respect for Isamu, Bob decided not to pursue the matter. Instead, he ordered them to return to Japan immediately. While waiting at the airport, Hajime learned that Bruce still had one final performance scheduled for that evening. He immediately insisted on returning to the troupe. At that moment, Isamu, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly raised a question: where exactly did the killer hide the murder weapon? It kept disappearing, then reappearing again. It was almost like magic. Those words instantly connected every clue in Hajime's mind. He finally understood everything. Hajime and Isamu immediately rushed back to the troupe and found Bob. Isamu personally guaranteed that Hajime would uncover the truth. Standing before everyone, Hajime began explaining his deduction. The police had concluded that Bruce was the killer based on the moment Renee's body fell into the water. But in reality, when Renee's body dropped, the killer was nowhere near the ceiling. Instead, the murderer had used a clever delayed release mechanism. Hajime demonstrated the method right in front of everyone. First, the killer soaked a piece of clothing with water and tied it securely to a railing. Then, using dry ice, the killer rapidly froze the wet fabric. Within moments, the soaked clothing became as hard as steel. The murderer used that frozen fabric to secure Renee's body to the ceiling. Then, all the killer had to do was wait for the blue stage lights to heat up the area. As the ice melted, the body naturally fell. That gave the killer a perfect alibi. Hajime continued, explaining that there was another reason the murderer used this method. The goal was to interrupt the performance, and interrupting the performance was the key to making the murder weapon disappear. Earlier, because Renee had gone missing, Sosuke had moved the mermaid performance to the beginning of the show. As a result, the Tiger Act became the grand finale, but the change in the performance order threw the killer's entire plan into chaos. 3 victims had died in succession: William, Renee, and Sosuke. All 3 had been shot with the same Derringer pistol, yet despite searching the cruise ship several times, the police never found the murder weapon. In reality, they had searched everywhere except for one blind spot: the tiger's stomach. No one would ever imagine that the gun had been hidden inside the tiger, and the only person capable of doing that was the tiger's handler, Lily, which meant Lily was the killer. The moment Hajime said that, everyone stared at him in shock. Even Miyuki couldn't believe that Lily was the murderer. Hajime continued his deduction. After every murder, Lily wrapped the pistol inside a piece of meat and fed it to the tiger. Whenever she needed the gun again, she gave the tiger a laxative, causing it to pass the pistol. But this trick had one fatal flaw. Once the tiger had been fed, it could no longer perform. That put Lily in an impossible situation. She had already killed Renee, and originally planned to hide the pistol inside the tiger after the tiger show ended. But Sosuke suddenly changed the performance order, moving the tiger show to the very end. That meant she couldn't hide the weapon before the performance was over. Left with no other choice, she used Renee's body to interrupt the entire show. This way, the tiger performance was cancelled, and no one would discover her trick. Faced with Hajime's accusation, Lily insisted that she had neither the motive nor the opportunity to kill her father. But Hajime shook his head. William hadn't been murdered. He had committed suicide. Lily had simply taken advantage of his death, disguising it as the first murder in a serial killing, while creating a perfect alibi for herself. The first flaw was the water covering William's body. If William had shot himself with a Derringer, his hands would have smelled of gunpowder. So Lily splashed fishy water over his body to mask the gunpowder residue and mislead the police. The second flaw was William's study. Earlier, Hajime and Bruce had visited William's hometown and found the study spotlessly clean. It looked as though he had been preparing for his own death. William's diary contained a detailed record of all his crimes. He had likely taken his own life out of overwhelming guilt, and Lily was the first person to discover his body. She was also the one who took the Derringer pistol. Hajime declared that the strongest piece of evidence was the gun hidden inside the tiger. All they had to do was skin the tiger with a metal detector, and the truth would be revealed. This time, Lily offered no further denial. She admitted that she was the killer. As for why she murdered them, it was to avenge her father. Isamu had come to Shanghai to reinvestigate a murder from 10 years earlier. The victim's name was Tetsuji. He was Lily's biological father. The truth was, Lily was originally Japanese. 10 years ago, Sosuke and his accomplices stole Tetsuji's truck. When Tetsuji tried to stop them, Sosuke ran him over and killed him. At that very moment, Lily had been hiding inside the truck to surprise her father as a prank. From inside the cargo compartment, she witnessed everything. She saw her father being killed, and she watched as Sosuke and the others disposed of his body. Terrified, she stayed hidden and never dared come out. The stolen truck was eventually smuggled into China, bringing Lily with it. When William found her, he took her in, raised her, and trained her to become an acrobat. As the years passed, she gradually forgot the tragedy of her father's death, until a few years later, while performing in Japan, she came across a magazine article about her father's unsolved murder. The hatred she had buried came flooding back. From that moment on, she swore to avenge her father. She remained inside the acrobatic troupe, waiting patiently for the perfect opportunity. Then she carried out her revenge, but she never expected to run into Hajime, who completely destroyed her carefully crafted plan. In the end, Lily was arrested by the police. Even after that, her friends would still visit her whenever they could, and she occasionally wrote letters to Miyuki, telling her how she was doing.